He toasted me with a plastic cup of lukewarm champagne and a cold bagel. That was my reward. After 3 years of negotiations, sleepless flights, and stomach ulcers strong enough to burn through steel, we landed the behemoth. The $250 million account that had ghosted our firm for over a decade. I built that trust from the ground up, brick by blood-soaked brick, and all I got was half a congrats from the CFO and a crusty everything bagel in the break room that still had someone's bite marks in it. But I smiled. I smiled so hard I felt my molars shift. I shook every sweaty hand, posed for the hallway photo, and let my father-in-law, yes, the CEO, slap me on the back like I'd just fetched his golf balls from a creek. He called me indispensable during the team huddle, said I was the reason we're in this room. People clapped. My cheeks hurt from nodding. Then he leaned in and whispered, "Great work, kiddo," like I was still 10 and had just spelled entrepreneur right at the spelling bee. His eyes were already scanning the room for someone else. That's when I felt it, a shift in temperature. That bone-deep instinct every woman in corporate America develops before she learns how to fake laugh at finance jokes. Something wasn't right. The next day, I noticed it. Calendar invite for a transition strategy sync between our team and the client. My name wasn't on it. I asked Clara, my assistant, if I'd been left off by accident. She gave me that look, the kind you give a deer standing in the middle of a highway at dusk. She clicked, hovered, and muttered, weird. She didn't make eye contact after that. And hey, while we're here, if you've made it this far, do me one favor. Tap that like button and subscribe. Seriously, 90% of folks listen and forget to hit it, and it's the only thing keeping my little storytelling crew from paying rent with vending machine dimes. Anyway, back to the horror show. The whispers started the following Monday. Big announcement coming, people said in the kitchen while avoiding my eyes. One guy tried to warn me with a cryptic, "Don't make any vacation plans." Another joked, "Hope you're good at training your replacement." And then there was Frank. Frank with the halitosis and the golf stories. Frank who once printed an entire PowerPoint deck in black and white because color ink was wasteful. Frank who thought CRM stood for Customer Relationship Mambo. He started showing up in rooms I usually held alone. Conference calls, pitch rehearsals, even the client golf dinner I'd been coordinating for 6 weeks, Frank somehow popped by. I caught him outside the boardroom one afternoon. He was tugging at his collar like he'd just seen his browser history printed out. "You lost, Frank?" I asked, half joking. He gave me a weird smile. "Just shadowing leadership this quarter. You know how it is." "Since when?" "Since Dale invited me." Dale, my father-in-law, CEO, king of country club deals and big hat energy. When I walked into the meeting room, Dale was already seated, flanked by two of the partners and a marketing intern who looked like she got lost on the way to her econ final. "We were just talking about you," Dale said. "Were you?" I said, smiling like a corpse at a wedding. "Oh yeah, can't believe what you pulled off. Legendary stuff. Just wait for next quarter's rollout." That was it. No title mention. No nod to what I'd built. Just legendary stuff. Like I was a viral TikTok and not the reason our year-end bonuses were going to require armored trucks. Later that day, someone, I don't know who, left a sticky note on my keyboard. No name, just 4 words, "Watch your six, Frank." I laughed when I saw it. Laughed so hard I had to shut my door. Because if that idiot thought he could take my project, he'd need more than Dale's golf clubs and a LinkedIn refresh. He'd need a damn miracle. The second accidental calendar omission came wrapped in passive-aggressive sunshine. "Hey Barb," chirped Mindy from PMO, bouncing into my office like she'd mainlined espresso through her tear ducts. "So sorry about the calendar snafu. Total system glitch. You know how Outlook loves to ghost people." "Totally," I said, sipping burnt coffee like it was blood. "It only ever glitches me, though. Curious, huh?" She blinked. "Haha, yeah, tech gremlins." And she practically moonwalked backward out of my office like she'd just delivered a ticking package and didn't want to be there when it went off. By Wednesday, it wasn't just one meeting. It was four. 4 key transition sessions with the client's onboarding team, where the workflows I spent 3 years designing were being picked apart, reshuffled, and get this, explained without me. I was supposed to be the architect, and somehow I was being treated like the intern who brought muffins. Each time I confronted someone, I got another soft smile explanation. "Oops, totally unintentional. Frank must have forwarded the wrong link. Didn't realize you weren't copied, so weird." And there he was, Frank, slouching around like a hemorrhoid with a clipboard, talking over people in meetings, using words like synergy cadence and macro onboarding touchpoints, which I'm 99% sure he read off a napkin from the hotel bar. He started throwing his weight around like he actually understood what we were selling. Once, he suggested we strip down the client dashboard to just the essentials, which, in his world, meant removing 80% of the custom integrations the client specifically asked for. It was like watching a toddler try to fix a Rolex with a butter knife. But nobody stopped him, because suddenly Frank wasn't just Frank. He was Frank the strategic growth advisor, Frank the executive in residence, Frank who golfed with Dale once a month and bought him a sleeve of Pro V1s. That's when the whispers started. At first, it was just harmless chatter from sales. "Did you hear Dale's bringing in new blood? They're talking optics now. Clients want gray hair and firm handshakes." Then the more pointed ones began. Barbara's great, but Frank looks like a partner. The board's discussing a leadership refresh for the older demographic. New client CEO is a traditionalist, they want someone seasoned. Seasoned, that word hit like acid reflux and a slap in the same breath. Frank had seasoning like mold his character, but it didn't stop there. On Friday, I saw a printed document left on the copier. Someone must have forgotten it. It was labeled Integration Leadership Transition Draft. My name wasn't on it. Frank's was. There were bullet points, a script for client calls, even a talking point about Barbara's invaluable groundwork in securing the account, as if I were some long-dead pioneer and Frank had just discovered my tombstone. I stared at that draft like it was a death certificate. That afternoon, I knocked on Dale's door. His assistant looked startled, like I was a ghost she didn't expect to see again. Is he free? I asked. He's in a call, she lied with the enthusiasm of a DMV brochure. I waited anyway. Sat right there in the plush lobby chair outside his glass-walled office while he laughed on speakerphone with someone about tea times and those damn new wedges. He saw me, looked straight through me, never paused the call. I left without a word. That night, I stood in my kitchen drinking wine straight from the bottle. My husband, Dale's son, bless him, asked if I wanted to talk. I said no, because I wasn't ready to speak. I was listening, watching, and starting to understand that this wasn't just a reshuffle. It was an erasure in slow motion. The email hit my inbox at 8:57 a.m. Subject line, all hands mandatory attendance. No details, just a start time, 9:15 sharp, and a location, the auditorium on 32, the one they only use when someone dies, retires, or a scandal needs preemptive damage control. I already knew what was coming. Still, I slipped on my blazer, the navy one with the stitched lining and sharp lapels that made me look like I meant business even when I didn't. I brushed my hair back, painted on a neutral face, and walked in like I was about to deliver a keynote instead of swallow a funeral. The room buzzed. Frank was already seated near the front, lips pressed together like he'd been practicing gratitude in a mirror. A few department heads nodded at me, sheepish, like they knew the knife was midair but hadn't tried to catch it. Dale took the stage at 9:17, late as usual, wearing his favorite sports jacket, the one that still had a mustard stain near the cuff from the partners' retreat last year. He smiled like he was doing the world a favor. Team, he began, this quarter has been transformational. Thanks to the hard work of everyone in this room, we've closed the largest deal in firm history. Polite applause. Didn't clap? And while we celebrate that win, he continued, we also prepare for the next chapter. A client of this size, complexity, and legacy requires leadership that reflects our values and vision. The air thinned. I'm thrilled to announce that effective today, Frank Devlin will step into the role of Executive Vice President of Client Integration. Frank stood up, on cue, smiling like a cat who just farted in an elevator. A few claps echoed around the room, the kind people give at weddings they don't want to be at. Dale gestured toward me without turning his head. Of course, none of this would have been possible without the incredible groundwork laid by Barbara. She's been a key contributor and an asset to our strategic pursuits. Let's give her a hand. I didn't stand. I didn't wave. I didn't even blink. I just stared at the back of Dale's smug, aging skull and thought about the dozens of nights I'd eaten dry almonds at my desk while Frank probably drank scotch in his golf pants. I looked around and caught eyes with Clara, my assistant. Her face was pale. She mouthed something I didn't catch. Probably I'm sorry, too late for that. Frank turned to shake my hand afterward. Hey, I know this is a big shift, he said, but I hope we can still collaborate. You built something incredible here. I smiled at him like a mother smiles at a snake crawling toward her child. That's very kind, I said. Congratulations. Then I walked past him, past Dale, past the rows of hollow applause, and headed back to my office. I sat down at my desk, deleted 3 drafts of emails that said too much, then opened a new one and typed slowly. Subject, Resignation Dale, effective immediately. Barbara, I clicked send. No drama, no caps lock, no grand finale. And I unplugged my monitor, packed my mug, my notebooks, the small wooden box of thank you notes from former clients, and the worn post-it that said don't let them take the wind from your bones. I left the keycard on the desk, locked the door behind me, took the elevator down in silence. By the time I reached the lobby, word had already spread. A few wide eyes. One bold soul asked, wait, you're really leaving? I shrugged. Just shifting vision and values. They didn't get it. No one did. They thought I gave up. They thought I let it go. But that resignation? That was just my opening move. For the first time in 10 years, my office badge didn't buzz me through any doors. No daily elevator rides with stale jokes about hump day. No forced laughter in the coffee queue. No catching glimpses of my name on whiteboards during strategy stand-ups I was no longer invited to. I disappeared from the firm as if I'd been photoshopped out of my own life. And yet, I wasn't gone. I spent those first 48 hours in what I like to call the kitchen war room, my dining table, covered in manila folders, sticky notes, printouts of email threads, and a contract so thick I nearly threw out my wrist flipping through it. Not that anyone at the firm would have noticed. I could have had a stroke on the Zoom call, and Frank would have used it as an opportunity to pitch a rebrand. Speaking of Frank, he was already being wheeled out like a prize pony. Prep calls with the client's onboarding team started the day after I resigned. He led them, of course. Clara, sweet, terrified Clara, leaked me the meeting summaries in the form of oops forwards. From what I could tell, Frank introduced himself as the new shepherd of the post-close journey. Yes, he said that, shepherd. Then he told the client that their full integration could be wrapped by Q1, which would have been lovely, if not for the minor issue that our actual delivery roadmap spanned 18 months, with 6 cross-functional checkpoints and 3 separate security audits, all signed off by legal. He mispronounced the client's COO's name twice, told them the CRM sync was plug and play, quoted the wrong tax jurisdiction for one of the European branches. It was like watching someone try to defuse a bomb with salad tongs. I listened to the recorded call through a file Clara had sent, bless her defiant soul, while chewing a pencil down to splinters. Then I opened a document I hadn't looked at since the week before the deal closed, the full client contract. The final, redlined, initials on every page version. It was still there. Clause 18C, executive continuity. In not-so-fancy terms, the client had requested, multiple times during negotiations, that I remain involved through onboarding. It had been non-negotiable. They didn't trust the firm. They trusted me. That clause had survived every red line, every board revision, every legal pass, and most important, it hadn't just been a request. It was tied to execution milestones. If I was removed from the process before onboarding began, the client had the right to void the agreement at their discretion. Let me say that again, at their discretion. I double-checked the timestamps. My resignation had been submitted the day before the onboarding phase was scheduled to kick off. That meant they'd accepted my resignation without reading the fine print. Or worse, they'd read it and gambled I wouldn't notice. I started building the file. Email threads between me and legal. Meeting notes where the client's GC specifically asked about my involvement. Calendar records showing the final contract signing with my signature timestamped. A version of the contract saved with edit history intact, proving who added clause 18C and why. Then I added the piece de resistance, an early draft from back when the contract was still a wild mess of competing demands and passive-aggressive comments in red. In that version, someone from the client side, someone important, had left a comment bubble next to my name. Barbara is the reason this got this far. We want her tied into delivery. Their words, not mine. And now the shepherd was leading the flock into oncoming traffic with a half-filled coffee mug and a smile that said, I once read a brochure about this industry. I wasn't angry anymore. Anger burned too fast. What I felt now was colder, more precise. I wasn't returning to fight. I was preparing to remove the need to fight. One clause at a time. The subject line read, can't wait to build the future together. Frank in all his clueless splendor had sent a chipper, emoji-laced email to the client's onboarding team. Nothing unusual, he was always overcompensating for his lack of substance with exclamation points and misused buzzwords. But this time, by some divine act of stupidity or maybe just karma wearing a name badge, he'd accidentally CC'd me. I stared at it over my third cup of coffee, reading it once, then again, then a third time just to confirm I wasn't hallucinating from rage. He wrote, we'll be proceeding with our standard integration model, as discussed in yesterday's sync. No additional continuity measures required from previous team members. I'll be your sole point of contact moving forward. No continuity measures. No mention of clause 18C. No mention of me. My name had been erased with a single sentence. Not even a footnote, just vanished. As if I hadn't poured 3 years of my life into that deal. As if the ink on the contract didn't still carry my initials. I didn't reply. I didn't scream. I just opened my war file, a folder on my desktop labeled Yoga Retreat 2023 in case anyone snooped, and added the email to it. Screenshotted it, time-stamped it, highlighted the phrase no additional continuity measures in nauseating yellow. Frank had officially bypassed the clause, which meant the firm was now operating out of compliance with a $250 million contract. And then the second surprise came. It was a message from a junior legal associate named Erin, someone I'd barely spoken to outside of weekly status meetings. She'd always been quiet, the kind of woman who took notes in a leather-bound planner and used paperclips like they were sacred. Her email subject line was, confidential, can I ask you something? Barbara, did you officially resign before onboarding kicked off with the client? I can't ask this on Slack. There's something you might want to see. Let me know if you're open to a quick call. Erin, I stared at that email longer than I should have, rereading the lines between her words. Erin wasn't just asking a question. She was holding out a match, unsure if she should light it. I called her from a burner phone I kept for international travel. No caller ID. She picked up on the first ring like she'd been waiting. Hi, she whispered. Thank you for calling. You said you had something I should see? A pause. Then, I reviewed the retention clause this morning. Clause 18C. I don't think they realized you were still legally attached when they accepted your resignation. I sent it the day before onboarding, I said flatly. That's the problem. Onboarding doesn't begin until delivery kickoff, which hasn't happened yet. I said nothing. My pulse thrummed behind my eyes. They should have triggered a legal amendment or at least consulted you, Aaron continued. Instead, they marked the clause as fulfilled and archived the file. You're still listed on the contract as the continuity officer. There's no signed waiver, no official transfer. It's wide open. Does the client know? I don't think so, but I saw a calendar hold this morning from their GC's office. Something about confirming personnel compliance before final onboarding approval. My mouth went dry. That meant the client was checking. That meant the gun was on the table, and nobody at the firm even knew it was loaded. I never signed anything waiving 18C, I said quietly. And I have the email from Frank confirming he's bypassing continuity. You should hold on to that, Aaron whispered. It might be the match. We ended the call. She never asked me to protect her name, and I never promised I would, but some things don't need to be said. I sat back in my chair and looked out the window at the gray skyline. Frank thought he'd inherited a win. Dale thought I'd bowed out gracefully. They hadn't just fumbled the handoff. They'd burned the entire playbook before the whistle blew. They forgot one thing. You don't get to erase someone before the ink dries. Not when the ink belongs to the only person who can legally trigger a $250 million detonation. And I had just found the button. There are certain kinds of voicemails that don't require playback. You can hear the tone in the transcribed preview before your thumb even hits listen. Dale's voice, smooth and self-satisfied, oozed out of my phone like cheap cologne. Barbara, hope you're enjoying some well-earned rest. You deserve it. Frank's already getting up to speed. He's a quick study. Thanks again for teeing things up so cleanly for him. Couldn't have done it without you. No congratulations. No acknowledgement of the clause he absolutely knew existed. Just that smug, rehearsed cadence of a man who's played the same country club con for 30 years and never had it blow up in his face. I sat in silence on the edge of my bed, phone in hand, staring at the wall like I could see through it to the boardroom, where they were probably patting each other on the back for surviving the transition. They thought I was done. A burnt bridge they could drive over without looking back. And then, like the universe decided it was finally in a generous mood, a single email slid into my inbox at 7:42 p.m. Subject, external final onboarding coordination, dial-in details attached to, Dale, Frank, legal at firm name CC, Barbara Wilson, Barbara. Wilson, someone had added me. Maybe by mistake, maybe on purpose. Maybe someone somewhere had a twinge of conscience. Maybe Frank fat-fingered the CC line. Or maybe the client's legal team had finally taken a closer look at the fine print and realized the continuity clause wasn't some decorative flourish. They were still bound to me. I didn't reply. I didn't reply to the invite. I didn't reply to the friendly reminder that followed the next morning. I didn't reply to the chat ping from Clara that said, "Are you seeing these?" I just opened the last email Frank had sent to the client, one where he declared that I was no longer involved, and I highlighted one specific phrase. Barbara has transitioned fully out of the engagement. All questions should now go through me. I forwarded it, no subject, no pleasantries. Just one line in the body of the email, please review clause 18C before the call. Sent it straight to the client's general counsel. No signature, no follow-up, just a fuse lit and left burning. After that, I closed my laptop and poured myself a drink. Bourbon, neat. The kind my father used to sip in his recliner after a long day of teaching sixth graders who didn't care about anything except lunch and dodgeball. My husband found me an hour later, glass half full, eyes fixed on the window. You okay? He asked gently. Your father thinks Frank is a quick study, I said. He didn't answer. He just nodded slowly and sat beside me. We didn't speak for a while. Didn't need to. There's a kind of silence that feels like momentum, like standing at the crest of a hill with the parking brake off, watching the car start to roll. The onboarding call was set for Thursday. Frank was going to walk into that call thinking the road was paved and the traffic lights were green, and I was going to be sitting in the passenger seat waiting for the crash. Thursday, 9 a.m. sharp. I was already logged into the Zoom call, camera off. Microphone muted, name anonymized to a string of numbers and initials, BW718Z. A ghost in the corner of the screen. Not seen, not heard. But still present. Still legally tethered to the contract through the clause none of them bothered to respect, much less remember. The waiting room pulsed. Names started blinking into existence. Frank arrived first, hopping into his square in a navy blazer 2 sizes too big, and a tie with a knot so tight it looked like it was choking him. He grinned like a kid who got picked to read morning announcements, oblivious that he was standing on a trapdoor. Then came Dale, my father-in-law, looking tan and relaxed in his tailored suit, chin up like he'd just aced the back nine, and was ready to take a victory lap in front of his biggest client yet. His background was the fake mahogany bookcase. Of course it was. 2 partners joined next. Then the firm's outside counsel, Martin Klein, Esquire, a man whose job was to sound confident while knowing less than his paralegal. He had a binder so thick I could see the strain in his wrist as he positioned it just out of frame, like a prop that whispered, "I'm ready for anything." Across the screen, the client team logged in. their VP of Operations, their Integration Director, and finally, at precisely 9:02, their General Counsel, Pamela Kim, stone-faced, hair slicked back, no earrings. I once saw her end a 3-year vendor relationship by closing a folder and saying, "We'll pass." That was it, just "we'll pass." 3 words, $5 million gone. She was the only person on this call who scared me a little, and I hope to God she still had my email open. Frank kicked things off naturally. "Good morning, everyone. Wow, what an exciting day. Thanks again for joining as we dive into this next phase of partnership." He gestured with his hands, already sweating through his shirt, then continued, "I've had the privilege of reviewing the materials Barbara left behind. Stellar stuff, really. We've streamlined a few things to make the rollout more agile and client-friendly, and today we'll walk through that roadmap and answer any questions before we begin implementation." He glanced at Dale. Dale gave a slow nod. Martin cleared his throat and opened his binder, flipping to a tab marked Client Post-Close. They were already assuming the call was a formality, a parade lap before the real work began. What they didn't realize was that the ground under their shoes was already crumbling. Pamela raised a hand. "Before we proceed," she said coolly, "I'd like to confirm a few compliance matters on our end." Frank blinked. "Absolutely, fire away." She didn't look at him. She looked at her screen, then read aloud. Clause 18C of the Master Services Agreement. Executive Continuity. This clause states, and I'm quoting, "The undersigned provider affirms the active participation of Barbara Wilson in all onboarding and integration activities, and agrees that any material deviation may constitute grounds for client contract termination, at the client's sole discretion." Frank froze. Pamela continued calmly, "We've reviewed recent communication from your team stating Barbara Wilson is no longer affiliated with this engagement. We'd like confirmation. Has this clause been amended?" Dead silence. Frank turned to Dale. Dale looked to Martin. Martin, who had just moments earlier been flipping pages like a magician about to reveal a rabbit, stopped mid-turn. Give me a moment to check that section," he said, already sweating. "There may have been a procedural update." "There was no procedural update," Pamela interrupted, voice still even. "We've checked. No signed waiver, no continuity amendment, and unless Miss Wilson is on this call and confirmed to be actively involved, we consider the clause unfulfilled." Another pause. Martin's binder dropped to the desk with a muffled thud. Dale leaned in toward his webcam and said, low and tight, "Please tell me you didn't accept her resignation." Frank's mouth opened, then closed, then opened again. No words came out. Pamela looked toward the participant list. "Is Miss Wilson on this call?" I took a breath. Let the silence stretch just long enough for the blood to drain from every arrogant face on that screen. Then finally I unmuted. One word, "Yes," and the temperature of the call dropped 10 degrees. "Before we proceed," Pamela said, her voice smooth as lacquer, "I'll just read aloud Clause 18C for clarity and record." She didn't rush. She didn't blink. She read it like a surgeon makes the first incision, slow, deliberate, impossible to misinterpret. The provider affirms the continued executive participation of Barbara Wilson through the initial onboarding period. Should Barbara Wilson be removed, resign, or otherwise become unavailable prior to the completion of onboarding deliverables, the client reserves the right to terminate the agreement in full, with no penalties or obligation, at the client's sole discretion. She folded the paper once, neat, like she'd done this before. No one moved. Frank looked like someone had just read him his own obituary. Face drained, throat visibly pulsing. He tried to smile, some hybrid twitch between denial and corporate optimism, but nothing came out. No one saved him. I watched Dale slowly turn his head toward Martin, the firm's lawyer, like a man asking his GPS how they ended up in a lake. Martin didn't even pretend to keep flipping. He just closed the binder, mid-call. His hands trembled for a moment, then stilled as he folded them in front of him like he was attending his own trial. Pamela looked directly at the camera. "To confirm, has Miss Wilson's participation been formally waived? Has a replacement been contractually approved by the client?" Dale cleared his throat, suddenly sounding like he had sand in his lungs. "We believed the clause was satisfied by project turnover and preliminary documentation." "It wasn't," Pamela said flatly. Martin's lips parted slightly, a dry gasp of oxygen as he leaned toward his mic, but Dale didn't give him the chance. He turned, voice barely audible through the feed, and muttered it like a man watching his retirement dissolve in real time. "Please tell me you did not accept her resignation." Frank blinked. "Well, I mean, yeah, I did. But she said she wrote it. I thought you thought?" Dale hissed. "You thought?" Pamela adjusted her chair. "From the client's perspective," she said coolly, "Barbara Wilson is still listed as the executive responsible for onboarding. We were not notified of any leadership changes, nor did we approve substitutions. At this moment, we consider this a potential breach of contract." The room, the virtual room, the Zoom grid of now visibly unraveling professionals, descended into the kind of quiet usually reserved for closed caskets and failed IPOs. I said nothing. I didn't smile. I didn't smirk. I didn't even blink, because this wasn't the moment for gloating. This was the moment where the entire $250 million deal, every forecasted dollar, every headline they pre-wrote for press releases, Every bonus they were already mentally spending was teetering on a single detail they treated like an afterthought: me. A woman who packed her own lunch, built the trust, closed the deal, and walked out without a word. And now, here I was, still legally present, still clause locked to the contract they signed and forgot to read. Watching a parade of suits realize they handed the keys to a man who couldn't even spell continuity. Nobody spoke. Frank tried. He opened his mouth, made a faint noise like a dying air conditioner, and went mute again. Martin wiped his forehead. Dale looked directly at the camera and said, "Barbara, are you still engaged with this client?" I unmuted again. 2 seconds of silence stretched like piano wire. Then I said, "I'm still available, but not as your employee." The silence that followed my words could have been sliced and plated. Dale didn't speak. Frank was frozen like someone had just unplugged him mid-update. Martin blinked twice, looked down at his binder like it might have magically rewritten itself, then folded his hands in defeat. The squares on the Zoom call all hovered in that strange digital stillness where no one wants to breathe first, because the oxygen might carry accountability. Then the client's VP of Ops, quiet until now, leaned forward. His voice was even, polished. "We were clear when we chose your firm," he said. "This deal didn't rest on branding or pitch decks or fancy titles. It rested on trust. And Barbara Wilson earned that trust over 3 years." He turned slightly toward the camera. "Without Barbara's involvement, our trust cannot proceed." Pamela Kim nodded once, only movement she'd made since detonating Clause 18C. "The contract remains valid only if Miss Wilson is materially involved. If she's not, we consider the agreement voidable effective immediately. We'll expect written clarification within the hour." The firm's Zoom squares all seemed to shrink at once, like they were collectively retreating from impact. And then I unmuted calmly, no smile, no tilt in my voice, just clear and cold like a January wind across asphalt. "I'm still available," I said, "but not as your employee." A beat passed. The VP glanced toward Pamela, who gave a near imperceptible nod. Then he looked back at me, and for the first time in this entire circus, he smiled. "Perfect. We'll engage you directly as consultant of record." He turned to the rest of the firm. "Your firm may consider its billing rights concluded as of this moment. Please refrain from sending further invoices. This will be a direct engagement with Miss Wilson moving forward." Dale's face didn't move. His mouth was slightly parted, his eyes glassy. If you told me he had a mild stroke during the call, I wouldn't have been surprised. Frank, oh Frank, had sunk so far into his chair it looked like he was trying to escape through the floor. His camera angle had tilted just enough to show his hands trembling in his lap. Martin opened his mouth, then closed it. A flicker of something crossed his face, respect maybe, or fear. No one spoke. The screen was a grid of corporate ghosts. I didn't gloat, didn't monologue, didn't give them the satisfaction of one last speech. I just moved my mouse to the bottom right corner of the Zoom window, hovered over the red button. Leave meeting. Click, gone, no goodbye, no back patting. No last glances at the wreckage. Just me, my claws, my proof. My power, quiet, unshakable, and finally mine. 3 years of work, one betrayal, and one clause they didn't respect enough to read. And now they get nothing. Not the deal, not the credit, not even a chance to fix it. I poured myself a coffee. Opened a new email draft. Subject, consulting terms direct engagement. And somewhere in a corner office filled with golf trophies and framed delusions, my father-in-law finally learned what it feels like to bet against the one person who never needed a title to win. Thanks for watching, you cubicle warriors. Hit that subscribe button. Unless you're my old boss, then you're on your own. Revenge of the coffee pot strikes again.